two documents from the KCCA. I hope you all had a good chance to read them. In case you did not, they should be somewhere on WhatsApp. You'll find them and have a look at them. John Paul, is everything okay? One of the documents we shared was a public health and food, was a statement of compliance to public health standards for food handling. This is a document that the KCCA distributes to all event managers and planners, but it does not necessarily mean that all events should you handle your food correctly and within the guidelines that they have set out. This is just to make sure that the public is safe when they're eating your food. But I believe these standards can also be taken into your restaurants or your takeaways or your businesses, your bakeries. Also, what I'd like us to discuss is how do we create standards in the front office, in the front of house, back of house, food handling, and all those aspects. So if there's anyone like James who would like to tell us, what are the standards you have put into place in the front of your house in Entebbe at your grill? Over to you, James.
Mark,
No, I cannot hear anything you've said. You're breaking up.
James, your network.
My network?
No, James.
I didn't hear the question, Mark. Can you hear me?
I asked, is it possible for you to tell us what standards you've set up at your front of house before we go into the kitchen, before we go into back of house? Your front of house being where service takes place, not a food. From when a customer enters your premise, your establishment, what standards have you put into place? And what standards do you suggest that the rest of us should put into place to ensure that we're running a proper business? Has James left? Is there anyone who would like to take this up? Or can I give you a few pointers of the things that we put in place at one of the places that I have consulted?
Maybe Mark, you can lead with that and I'll just get in.
Okay. One thing that you know, your serving staff or your servers have got to be clean. And in this day of COVID, things have even changed. So a few more things have come into play. Cotton is a good material to keep because it's one, easy to clean, two, always looks good, and it's not too hot when they're moving around. But if you have your staff in cotton uniforms with an apron, they actually look smart. And in today's world, we prefer them to wear face shields as opposed to face masks. Face masks get them warm. They start warming up, they start fogging if they're wearing glasses, then they start to look tacky and you always see them pulling them down and pulling them up. Whereas we prefer to feel safe when we enter the restaurant. So we prefer them to wear face shields. And I think we need to encourage all our servers, or all of us need to get face shields for our front of staff, front of house staff. Also, regular cleaning. It is a new norm, but many places I go to, they don't do this anymore. I mean, they don't do this at all. You come in, you tell the guys, please clean. They come and clean with a cloth. The government has said, please clean with sanitizer. Why? Because of the COVID-19. Also, we need to make sure that our front of house guys have their hand sanitizers with them at all times. We were also told in the beginning that electronic cash is better than physical cash. But then where does that leave the cards? If I want to swipe, do we wipe down the cards as soon as we get them back? Or do we wipe them before we give them in for service? Front of house people, do they wipe down the consoles before they give to us to enter our our pins?
Yeah.
last week I visited Momo Seri for their shawarma, and they handed me an iPad, and that's where the menu was. That looked very interesting to me. It's easier to wipe down. It was in a rubbery kind of case, and they wiped it down before they gave it to me. I looked through it, but also laminated menus are easy to clean, as opposed to the paper ones that many establishments have. But the electronic ones, even the ones on the wall, like to those places like KFC, the fast food joints, the TV's up there. You just look up and pick. So there's limited contamination there.
But some of the things, Mark, you may find that some of them are a bit expensive for somebody starting up.
Yes, but lamination is not. You know, when you have, there are those paper books, those ones are a bit more, they're harder to clean, but easier to get dirty. But laminated ones are not, you just wipe them down. Another thing that I saw that I think is an interesting thing, we used to go to restaurants, high-end restaurants, you go and you find cutlery on the table, right?
Yes, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, that cutlery gathers dust, somebody comes, touches it, has a beer, goes away. Do they ever change the cutlery? But there's also the other thing, when the guys are serving you, they bring the cutlery, then go away and they don't bring the food in 20, 30 minutes. They're just trying to confuse you.
Oh, yes. I know.
You know, but I think it's better if they bring the cutlery when the food is just about to come, right?
Yeah.
What other front of house things do you guys have in place or you think are important that we need to adopt?
Should the reception facing people, should the customer serving people also be sort of like have short hair or covered hair or stuff like that?
Yes, actually I didn't talk about that, but covered hair is important. In fact, covered hair is not only important in restaurants. I tell you the other day, my mate served me some food, it was very nice, but 3 forks flew in and there was a strand of her braided hair in there. I did not know how to handle this. So we had a problem at lunch. But yes, I think even the front of house people need to have their heads covered, because when they're bringing the food to you or the drink, some things may go in, especially those that have dandruff. People like me with bald heads, most especially, because we don't know when our hair is lost. But yes, Abid, I think even the front house receptions, the concierges, all those guys, everybody needs to have a covered head. James, welcome back. We wanted to get your standards in Entebbe because I had people wanting to come and visit you there. What have you put in place at your front of house?
First of all, I have started as a delivery-based business. So that is a bit different for now. The one thing that perhaps I make sure I do a lot of grilling. So every off days that I have, I am always scrubbing down the grills, my equipment. At least every week, I'm scrubbing it down, cleaning the space thoroughly. And usually, if you don't do that, over time, smoke and oils stick hard. So I try to avoid that by making sure that I'm scrubbing things down. Particularly my prevention of, like when I'm preparing the meats, I make sure I sanitize the place. Clean the place with hot water. If I'm cutting vegetables, I don't cut vegetables where I'm cutting the meats. Those two places are different. That way there's no cross contamination of food. Even when I'm storing, I store things in different levels just to make sure that the meats don't get in contact with the vegetables. So I try to make sure that the handling of food is particular, and also that my equipment is as clean as possible, and my environment itself. That is for now my steps that I take to make sure that the standards of cleanliness are high.
Yes, thanks, James. From what I hear, even if you start from a delivery, even if you're doing delivery,
yes,
that may become your front of house, because who's doing the delivery? What do they look like when they leave?
And
I make sure. How do they handle the food? Because that now becomes your front of house.
I see. I have a container and a container where I put the food. If it's coming from me to the person, there's a box that I put the food in. I make sure I seal the food as well. That way that the person knows that it is not touched until it's delivered. And every handling is clear. It's kavera to a person steps away, the person picks up the kavera. That way there's no hand touch contact. I have trained the border person already, and the border person is also very clean and is Muslim, which makes it even more interesting.
When you're serving pork, he's a Muslim.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
talked about. Is there anyone else who wants to talk about their front of house? Asha, yes, you do have a front of house. Yes, you run a bakery, but you do have people who, when we come to pick up our cakes, there are people we meet. What standards have you put in place at your bakery?
Mark, I try so much to avoid picking up from here. It rarely happens because first of all, every client wants to meet you personally, and then you're working, and then this is your home too. So I try so much to stay away. But for those who insist, usually the thing we do is that we have they don't get out of their cars. Usually when they park, we bring the cake out immediately because most of them call for directions. Those who know where we are, sometimes they are the ones who come knocking. We are always putting on aprons. That is the first thing we do. We make sure our aprons are clean, and then we cover our heads. In the COVID era, there are very, very few. So, but we have water for washing hands. Yeah, that's it.
Can I add something from a bakery perspective in terms of cleaning everyone? I'm kind of agree with Asha at the point of, especially us who work at home in our homes, how we ensure that we don't get contaminated, and also keeping a bakery space separate from the home. And also when we are preparing to start baking a cake, you make sure that you wipe down all the surfaces with a vinegar water solution. And I think that also works for the food handlers. The bakery assistants all have to have short nails and have to have their hair covered. Short nails that do not have any nail varnish, because nobody wants to eat a piece of someone's nail varnish in their cake, which is very unsightly, first of all. But then my question is also, I also have a question for the people that handle food. There's a lot of hype and talk about cross-contamination, other diseases that chicken carries. So my question to the group is, do you wash your chicken? In what way do you ensure that is it salmonella that chicken carries does not get contaminated with the other meats like beef or pork? Is it sure that all that stuff doesn't happen? And also from a halal perspective, if you're preparing pork and you're preparing chicken as well. Now, if you have customers that don't eat pork, do you use a separate grill? Do you use separate pans? What happens?
Okay, thank you for that. You've skipped directly into food handling, which I guess we will tackle shortly because even James talked a bit about it. But before we go into that, James and Abid talked about covering heads, but then we didn't talk about beards. I mean, look at James's picture. Or look at my tiny beard. You know how, even look at Abid, it's very possible that a lot of this hair can get contaminated to the food. So the question James has is, what is our take on beards? Do we cover them? Do we cut them off? You talked about nails, cutting nails and keeping them short, which is very key for hygiene, especially with food handling. But what do you guys think about beards before we go into actual food handling? Because that's another major topic when it comes to standards and food handling. Anyone wants to discuss this? John Paul?
I think also beards need to be kept clean. Okay, sorry. Okay, obviously have to be kept clean. But I wonder if there's a wrap for beards, such you can put it above on your beard as you're operating.
You would be surprised, but I believe there is. And now COVID has shown us face masks exist. I'm sure you can get one big enough to reach your neck. But I believe there is. Lionel, any contribution from you, John Paul, before we go into food handling? And I see Rotary Club of Bunamuaya.
Bugolobi.
Of Bugolobi. The whole club's here. Good to meet you guys. Okay, if there's no comment there, can we go into food handling? This is one thing that James talked about earlier. He said he tries to keep his vegetables away from his raw meat. I wanted to ask him, before we go deeper into the subject, do you have different fridges for your meat and from your vegetables and fruits?
Not really, but I keep the meats in plastics. That way there is no spillage onto the vegetable.
The advice I was given a few years ago is that you always keep your vegetables at the top because they don't drip much, and the meats at the bottom. But then it didn't. Now that comes to a stand-up fridge, it didn't consider temperatures, because the fridges I have here in my house for my domestic, the vegetable racks are at the bottom.
Yes,
so do you also separate your meats in that way, or you just keep them in plastics and store them wherever?
The vegetables are at the bottom because of it's a stand-up fridge. So I stack up these big plastic containers that are available. You can arrange very well in the fridge, all the meat, and the vegetables can be at the bottom. I find that I have not been able to have any problems, but my counter surfaces are different for the meats and for the vegetables. Wherever I'm working with the meats, different from the way I'm working on the vegetables.
That said, can you go a bit deeper and answer Barbara's question? Because she asked, especially how do you handle halal issues, especially now that you do pork and chicken? Just delve a bit deeper into your handling of that particular situation, especially the meats, the vegetables, the chicken, the pork, and your Muslim rider. James, are you still there?
Of course. Yes, I am still here. Of course, the first thing she said was what I do. I make sure that I clean the chicken thoroughly and the meats. Usually I clean the chicken first and store it separately. That for first of all, I feel like eliminates a lot of that issue. Some people do put vinegar in the water when they're washing their chicken, but I don't do that. I don't see the necessity for that. And the meats I also separate. I also prepare them separately. For the moment, because I am having one grill, but previously I used to have two grills to separate the chicken and the pork. But one thing I just don't do is I don't cook the pork and the chicken at the same time. The grill can cook up to 350 degrees. So it helps me to destroy any contaminations, should there be any inside that grill. So it helps me to at least be sure that there is no cross-contamination. And also I cook the meats to well done, to actually make sure that there's no, what do you call it, leftover remnants of bacteria. At least those are the few. For now, that's what I'm doing. But with time, I'm definitely go back to what I used to do. But for now, it will not make economic sense. to have two grills, but I don't cook them at the same time, the meats and the chicken. That's what I do.
Mark.
Okay.
As for the delivery, it is the pork guy doesn't. I mean, my border guy doesn't touch the pork or the product, so it doesn't really matter. All he knows that he has to deliver the product to the client, and that is all he's willing to do. I'll not ask him for anything more than that.
Okay, thanks, James. Yes, Abid, you were saying something?
With the halal and with the halal aspect, for a lot of the more committed Muslims, as long as you serve pork on your menu, they don't consider. There is no way you can convince them that you're halal in any way. So even if you're having separate pans, separate grills, or separate anything, as long as there's pork on the menu, they'll be like, no, this is not halal. I actually know a few who actually enter restaurants and hotels and ask, do you have pork? As soon as a person says yes, they walk out.
Okay.
And I can understand that because sometimes you may find, even if you have set these things separate, someone will use a fork that has been used in pork, also with chicken, something like that. That one's going to happen. Some people try to separate the two, but most committed Muslims, to remove any chance of that, they just do not consider anything halal if you have pork on the menu.
Okay, for a very long time, I have always tried to keep the two separate. And that's why I actually prefer to cook while, my public is looking at me. Because you will always notice that my pork has its own grills and it's very separate from my chicken. And even when I'm with my staff, I keep reminding them, do not use the same knives, do not use the same board. If you're handling chicken, you're handling chicken. Do not touch pork at all. And I've had many Islamic clients who've come and they eat. I don't know if they're the non-committed you're referring to.
I was very careful not to use that word.
I've always found a way of separating them. Pablo, welcome. We're talking about food handling right now, and we had a concern of how do you keep your food halal, separate your porks and your chicken? How do you separate your meats from your vegetables, from your fruits, from your raw foods? How do you generally handle food? And recently, because of this COVID, by the way, Unilever has come up with a number of resources on this. If I don't know, I can find them and share, but they've come up with a number of resources on food handling, on cleanliness, on hygiene during COVID, especially for food. I think because of the number of food additives and stuff that they make for us. I'll look them up and try to share them. But Pablo, if you have anything you want to add on to our discussion, though you've come a bit late, I can give you the floor. And then Charles, do you have anything? I've been calling on John Paul, but he seems to still be suffering with his microphone.
I am okay. Let me just keep listening, guys. Let me just keep listening.
Welcome, Bob. I'm Lionel and the Rotary Club of Bugolobi. If you have anything to add, please feel free to jump in.
John Paul hasn't dialed in.
He hasn't dialed in?
Yeah.
Yes, he has not. But he's here, I can see him. And
yes,
I know he can hear us.
Yeah. I've actually sent him a chat, but he hasn't dialed in.
Okay. James, I'm drinking Tusker Light, but you can send me more. There's no problem with that. It was too early for coffee. So anyway, let's talk about the FDA. They talk about food handling. And one of the things they've been telling us in recent weeks is wash your hands. Keep your hands washed. I personally have a problem when I'm cooking. Every time something touches my hands, I just have a desire to wash it off. And I find myself, I think I use most water in washing my hands. And also once I've used the cutting board for meat, I immediately rinse it off. Actually, I have 4 cutting boards in my house here, and I use about 2 or 3 for every cooking. So I'm washing them off constantly. I'm washing knives, I'm washing my hands, I'm wiping surfaces, just because I want the kitchen to keep clean. But when I go to other kitchens, I find because of the volume of work they're doing and because they don't have trained people, the floors are constantly dirty. Dishes are piling up. How many times a day do you wash up? How many times a week do you descale your equipment? How many times do you close to just make sure you wipe down all, the cooking surfaces and everything? Please share your experiences here with us. I'll start with Asha. I know yours are a different business from my meat, but I know you also you need to clean your ovens.
And also, Asha, maybe you can.
Yeah, now, the thing about baking, like you mentioned, it is almost same as cooking. When I am baking, I wash and wash and wash and wash, as in you just don't get tired of washing. Sometimes the washing tears you in pieces than even the work itself. One thing that I do with the oven, I got some company that does good oven cleaners. Before it was hard because I used to soak it in bicarbonate and vinegar, and those things sometimes don't work. So there is a wash that I got that is in the oven. It doesn't take long. You soak it for like 10 minutes, and then after you start the wiping process. So I tell, because everyone has roles there, because we all have different categories. So now there is a guy who specifically does that on Sunday. And then the baking tins have to be washed like every after a bake. That is a must. One thing that irritates me is when I find a baking tin that is rusty or it has black mold. It is so disgusting, to a point that I stopped eating very many cakes around town. I eat like from 2 or 3 different people because I know what goes in, like what happens in the background when people are lazy to wash certain things and they contaminate the final product. Then when it comes to the finishing, also we have to make sure that we are clean. Wash, 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 and wash. I would rather stop the whole process when things are not going the way I want. Like if I find anything dirty, I just stop the whole process, everyone out, and we clean. So I think being clean is part of the cooking or the baking process. It is not something we do after or it has to be done at the end of the day. It is continuous throughout. That's what I think.
Before you go away, there are 2 questions for you. One is, how do you do halal issues? And then the phone here called Techno1 Pro asking, what oven cleaner is that?
The oven cleaner, I'll share it in the group. I have a picture. There are some guys, I think, from Chireka. So I will share the picture of the oven cleaner. Then about the halal, now ours, the only thing that makes it haram is some cakes require rum or brandy, some alcohol. Those are fruit cakes. Those don't happen every day. They happen on special orders because they are also expensive, and also most of them are wedding cakes. When it is a Muslim client, we always advise them. When you explain to some of them the baking process, and you tell them that when you bake with this alcohol, most of it evaporates. The first thing usually they ask you is that, does it make me drunk? Because you give them 2 options. The cake that is unpreserved is going to stay for like 2, 3, at most 4 days. And the cake that is preserved is going to stay for like a month plus. So most of them, you give them that option and they ask that, is the alcohol, will it make my guests drunk? And they ask all these questions because most of them have learned that most food is cooked with alcohol. Their problem usually is the pork. But the alcohol, most of them will tell you, if it is not going to make my guests drunk, it is okay. Some will say, no, that is a no-go. And then you give them something that is not preserved. But that doesn't happen every day. It is like a rare case.
Thank you, Asha. Tuti, do you have anything to talk about? We're talking about food handling and hygiene. We're talking about wash or not to wash. We're talking about how often do you clean up your kitchens? How often do you clean up your grills? Do you ever lock up and say, guys, it's cleaning day, we are not cooking food today? Your pans, you please weigh in. We're also talking about how do you store your food? How do you handle your food? Your raw foods versus your raw meats versus your vegetables. Please, Tuti, if you can. Atuhairwe, how do you do it?
Good morning, guys. Mark, from
Breakfast.
Now, most of
really,
Breakfast.
special. I was here trying to explain, and I see a green butterfly. Okay. Now usually at Yungu we do Sundays. Sundays, if we're not busy, this is our cleanup day for the entire kitchen. Entire kitchen, I mean every corner of the kitchen. That's usually Sundays. It's the week hasn't been so busy for us to be booked out on Sunday. We usually do a general cleaning from, the kitchen, the utensils, where they're kept, the spice corners, all the way to the bathroom and the entire area. So yes, usually Sundays is a day that is designated for cleaning, like total cleaning. Yeah, I don't know what else we talked about, but yeah.
And how do you store your food? Do you have
Pardon?
any standards you've set? Your raw meat versus your vegetables, do you have any standards you set up, or do you just get them in and prepare everything at once? You have no issues when it comes to halal, where you just say, mufumbe straight away. Mix your chicken and pork with your goat and stuff.
Well, when it comes to storing, the raw meats are usually stored in the freezer, and they're all in different containers, so the containers totally don't mix. Now, when it comes to the halal, most of the pork at Chiyungu is usually roasted, so strictly it has its own grill, a small green grill that is used for roasting. Then the chicken is oven grilled in the oven, so there's no way it's mixed. Maybe when they're washing the utensils because they put them together, but when we're cooking for the clients, there's no connection between the two. Then vegetables, of course, they're washed up with some vinegar and salt, soaked up for a few minutes, and then about 10 to 15 minutes. Then wiped and put in the fridge. So that's most of
Okay. Anyone else with a comment before we move on from this?
I have a comment, Mark. Or
Yes,
is it
please.
a question? When it comes to cutting boards, in my experience, wooden boards over time kind of absorb the different flavors and the different colors of the things that you're using, especially like things like spices like turmeric and paprika, and also the wooden spoons that we use to cook. My question would be advice on how to keep your wooden cutting boards clean and free from contamination, or should we ditch the wooden boards in favor of plastic and granite? Because at some point, like you're washing the board and you feel like it's a bit slimy. How do you deal with that? Do you scrub it? Do you sandpaper it? Do you soak it? Yeah. Then also to Asha's point about cleaning as you go in the baking business, because we wash more than we bake really. So my advice may be to others that are using things that have a high fat content to always wash with liquid soap that has vinegar, and also hot water, using hot water first before you wash. And also while you clean your floors, I have found that when we use liquid soap that has some sort of acid, it kind of repels the flies, which is also an issue, especially if you're working a lot with sugar. There's an issue of flies and bees. Do you people experience insect infestation in your various cooking establishments, and how do you deal with them?
Bees, not as much. Flies and ants, probably yes. I actually never knew that. You said detergent that has acid repels flies. I'd never known that. Thank you for that. If you could also share some brand names, it would be very helpful for me. I have a tin of descaler from Saraya. It costs 10,000 shillings at the master supermarket. Every time I grill, I have my metallic brushes. We descale and remove all the fat off the grill every single time. It's 10,000 bucks, but it lasts. It lasts about what, 2 months for me?
Mark, please share the name of that.
It's from Saraya. You know the Saraya, the guys who do the hand sanitizer?
Yes, yes.
They're the
But
same
the
guys
name
that
of the
make that.
product.
It's I'll take a picture and share it. It's a descaler, one of those. I'll take a picture.
Okay.
Now, chopping boards. I have, as I said, I have 4 chopping boards. Wooden one, that plasticky thing. I find the wooden ones are better for myself because after a few weeks, I can sand them down and remove all the cuts that would probably get all the, stuff left in there. But before I get any chopping board, it has to be a really thick one because I don't know how long I'll use it. And we keep sanding it down, sanding it down. Recently, I sent it to the carpenter and he got this, that, I don't know what they call that, planer. And I almost killed the guy because he brought me back half a chopping board. Yet the guys before used to just sand them down and smoothen them and they would be good to use. But I make sure that I do that very frequently, 2 or 3 weeks, to keep them, nice and clean and easy to wash up. The plastic ones, on the other hand, when they get old, they start to become bubbly, and I find that they get dirty and harder to clean. So I hate those chopping boards. Anyone else with an experience with this they can share? Walker?
Well, me and chopping boards don't really have issues because I rarely use the chopping board. I always use a metallic tray. There is a metallic tray that I often use for. It's actually quite thin. It's thin, but its balance is actually perfect when you put it on a flat surface. So I often use it for doing the vegetables, the small things that require chopping, the garlic and the onions. And the rest of the things, if I can actually squish everything, like the tomatoes, because I rarely like using cut tomatoes because there's always that feeling my sister gets whenever I cook. And if the tomatoes are not right, obviously the meal is just going to be weird. So I just like to squish the tomatoes in and then I just add them into the sauce as a paste. My chopping, I rarely use the chopping board. Very, very rarely. Very rarely. So I don't know. I don't really have much experience with some of the challenges you're facing, but I think sandpaper can also work for these plastic chopping boards that you guys are saying, because if you can sand that wooden chopping board, I'm certain you can always find a way with that with the plastic thing, and it works out.
I'll give it a try. Thank you for that. Anyone else wants to weigh in?
We wanted to mention something about the board, the wooden boards. As long as you get to dry them really well after you have cleaned them up, I don't think you would have an issue later. Usually it's cleaning up, the process after, the drying up. If it does not dry, the next time you're going to use it, it has created that slimy part. So that's how I usually do my boards. I do scrub them, wash them, and then I make sure I find a spot that has enough sunlight for it to dry completely. So the next time I'm using it, it's not slimy.
Yeah, and to add to that, one thing that you always must remember is that in our kitchens, we cannot afford not to have running water. Everything must be washed under running water. You can't have basins and start putting chopping boards in there. I don't know, but that is advice that I was given many, many years ago. And I think it's key. I don't know what you guys think about having running water. It's not too much of a luxury, and it's quite cheap.
Mark, question please. Has anyone actually thought about, personally, when I'm doing the washing, and I often face this when like you're cooking greasy foods, pork, there's that pork fat, then there is oxtail, there's always that fat that comes off it. Now, I often use salt, like I just boil the water, dump it in, and then to add some salt. Like, I don't know, but I've felt that there is a significant ease that it adds to like washing the dishes and pans and whatnot. I don't know if anyone else uses that as well.
How much salt?
Not much. Just I think.
So using salty water, and not using salt as a coarse material.
Yes, salty water. I don't know if anyone else uses that, but that's what I've actually used, and it actually works fine for me.
I haven't, I must say. Anyone else have an idea on the salty water?
I have heard that thing about the salty water, but I've just never used it before. Usually, a lot of the things that I'm doing is a combination of soap and hot water and warm water if I want to get rid of certain things. And for a thing you asked about cleaning, yeah, usually for me at the end of every day, there has to be full cleaning. And I know some restaurants which can afford it have a separate person for cleaning. Their job is just to clean the floor, clean the utensils all the time. They have like 2 of those who are just running around doing that. But for me, every day when you are done with any event, anything, the cleaning has to be done. Even if it's midnight, that cleaning must be done at that time.
Okay. So that means you have a checklist that you have written on a, another thing, when I went and I did a day in one of these big hotels, I was amazed at the number of notice boards they had. Almost every wall was covered in notice board, and there were menus there, there were checklists here, there were reminders here. Do you guys have these in your places, or we need to encourage you to put them up?
I don't have a checklist, but yeah, I can see how useful it is, because having the checklist actually helps a lot. Yeah, it makes sense, because I did the checklist for the cooking side, the recipe side, so obviously this should also work this way. Like, have you done this? Has this been done? Because people do forget. Not that they're lazy, but they just forget. So
or they just decide to ignore, hoping you will forget.
Yes.
What does that checklist look like for cleaning?
Pardon, James?
What does a checklist for cleaning look like?
A checklist for cleaning would generally be, it can be many-pronged. It could say, like, Tuti, Sunday, general cleaning, and not cooking between this time and this time. Or yours could even be, make sure that when you come in the morning, all the dishes are clean, all the surfaces are clean, all the handles are wiped down. So it's there, you just tick off and say, yeah, all this has been done. Now we can start the brigade. As opposed to just coming and saying, oh, you look around and everything's clean. It's a checklist actually ticks off and you're sure this has been done. Does that help answer you?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. It's like in the loo. Haven't you seen they put it every hour, cleaned by so-and-so, he used 2 spoons of water. And they just keep on ticking it off. I don't know if they do it, but when I walk into the loo,
I don't think they do.
2 spoons of water.
Yeah, because I saw somebody saying that they actually gauge the restaurant by the cleanliness of the loo, which brings me to another question. I have always told my cooks, if you leave the kitchen, take off your apron, take off your hat, go do what you want to do, wash your hands from wherever you are. When you come back, sanitize, put on your apron, put on your hat again, and the work goes on. I find that even me, I find it comes naturally to me. When I'm walking out, I just go, take them off, hang them up, do other things, come back. So that's one aspect. Make sure that whenever you leave the environment of the food handling, cooking area, you don't take clothes out to get contaminated. And when you come back, make sure you're clean. Secondly, how often do we clean, or how often do we have clean dishcloths to use?
Oh, yeah.
Aino, do you want to weigh on this? Do you have a comment?
Thank you, Mark, but basically I'm just listening and learning.
Okay, fair enough. Bob, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here, but as Aino said, I'm listening, learning. That's all.
All right. Good. So, Asha, you want to say something on this?
Mark, what was the question exactly?
We were talking about now hygiene of the general person when they leave the kitchen and go out and come back. I said that I always encourage and I insist that if you leave the kitchen, leave the apron and the hat and the dishcloth, go do what you're doing, wash your hands, come back, sanitize, dress up, and continue to work on the business. And also,
yeah, that is very true.
Keep your clothes clean.
That is very true because some people think an apron is an outfit, something fashionable, and they're going to buy airtime and they walk out with their aprons. Yes, I also agree with you. An apron is supposed to be kitchenware, not our casual attires. So I also encourage people to leave them behind. Though sometimes we have challenges that, like, when it comes to washing. Some people want to, everyone is different. Some people want to wash daily, others want to wash like after 2 days, others after 3 days. So usually I got one person to wash everything. Then also getting one person to wash everything, sometimes other people's aprons are not in. It is so annoying that you cannot wash your own apron. To you, it is clean. To me, it is dirty. So to avoid all that morning quarreling of why I'm putting on a dirty apron, I'm like, okay, someone is going to handle this, I wash it. And then if your apron is not available for washing, it is so annoying, and you have to get another apron to give this person. It is something that really pisses me off. But for my own peace, I go get an apron and I give it to you. Because once I quarrel with someone, my day is ruined. And I want to keep a happy face so that all my work is creative. The thing about baking is that when you're angry, it shows in your work. Even cooking, you may end up adding more salt in your sauce. So sometimes I don't want to quarrel because I've told you over and again. I just go get an extra apron, give it to you, and move on with my work. So I don't know how people handle that, but to me, it is like, I don't know if it is babysitting these people, but it gives me peace.
I think it is babysitting. Workers seems to think that the apron is a responsibility of the wearer. I think for peace of mind, as Asha does it, when you're done with the work day, put everything in a bin there, because then I'm in control of when it's washed, how it's washed, when, and then when you come to work, it's available. Anybody else to want to comment on this attire business and also the responsibility of the apron?
For that one of the, okay, also something you mentioned earlier about the towels. I remember somebody noticed once that my towels were really in a bad state. So I tried keeping them clean. So what this guy came and he just gave me those paper towels, the ones that are disposable. He's like, these are much easier. And I was like, yeah, actually this works for me because I don't really now have to keep track of if my dishcloths are dry. That helped. Obviously, it brings a bit more expense, but it brought a bit more convenience and speed. For the apron issue, the place where I did my internship, everybody was supposed to have 2 aprons. And those aprons were not the responsibility of the person, but responsibility of the business itself. So at the end of the day, when you're leaving, you'd leave your dirty apron and your dirty attire in a particular place. Somebody would clean it. So next day when you're coming, your second option is available. So you keep oscillating that way. And if you put this responsibility on the wearer, it's a bit extra work. And sometimes some people will go home and they have issues, or somebody's tired, or just generally something will happen. But if they can do it here at the workplace, you get somebody to clean it, this would help. It increases the expense.
Does that mean you had lockers? And who had access to the lockers? You and the cleaner, or just you?
It was us and the cleaners.
When you finish washing, they'll just dump your apron in the locker.
Yeah.
Okay. Pablo, do you have anything to add to this? How many minutes do we have, Abid, to go?
We have 7 minutes.
7, okay.
Yeah.
We'll need to wrap up. No?
No.
Anyone else with something to say before I talk about safety?
Maybe I just have
Oh,
one thing. Hello? I'm
yes,
saying
please go
that
ahead.
I have one thing to add about dishcloths. The same way we treat our aprons, I agree with Asha. We have one person that washes all the aprons, and they have to be soaked before they are washed because of all the food color and all that stuff that we use. Now, when it comes to dishcloths, every 3 days, like I have different categories of dishcloths. I have the nice ones, and then I have the ones for daily wear. Now, the ones for daily wear, we must boil them in omo. Like we boil them in omo and leave them to cool, and then wash and rinse with running water to make sure that they don't have any of that slimy thing, which really is disgusting. But then there are some dishcloths that do the dirtier work, and then there are dishcloths that do the not so dirty work as well. So for Abid, who uses paper towels, I don't know, how do you lift your pans off the hot fire? Do you use paper towels to really carry all that stuff every day? I don't think it's something that is, I don't think it's economic.
Oven
Pardon?
gloves. I use oven gloves and also some paper cloths for lifting the pans.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then for wiping down your surfaces, do you use paper towels?
Paper towels, yeah.
Really?
Actually, the truth is paper towels work much better than the cloth towels when it comes to wiping
I also
down
agree.
surfaces.
I also agree, yes. And it is cheaper to maintain.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. I'll adopt that and see how it works out.
Okay, just try it. You'll tell us what happened during the week. Before we talk about safety, James wants to talk about fumigation, which is key when it comes to cleanliness. James, your thoughts on fumigation, please?
It's not about thought, but rather do people do fumigation? I notice that everyone is talking about cleanliness, but do people take time to fumigate, and how do they go about it? Usually when I fumigate, I have a heart to close the business for 2 days just to make sure that I can fumigate well. What do people do?
Well, my business that I do from home, I fumigate whenever I fumigate the house. And my business doesn't necessarily close because I choose very carefully when to fumigate. The other place where I go and do some work once in a while, we have fumigated quite a number of times, and yes, we close for the day. There's some fumigators who come and tell us, this stuff, within 5 hours it will go. But we all know what fumigation means. Everything comes out of the woodworks, so you have to have a long day of cleanup. But so closing the business for 2 days is a stretch. But if they come very early in the morning, by the next morning when you open up, you should be okay. Anyone wants to weigh in on fumigation?
I don't know if I can say something about fumigation. By the way, I have a challenge with these small insects that are attracted to sugar, because there's a cabinet that has mostly the sugar, because it has the brown sugar, then the regular sugar. Now I have a challenge of those insects. I don't know if anyone has one of those chemicals that they can recommend, because I am really in a pickle. And those things, you come out in the night and you find them, they're all over the countertop, and it's like they're having a party of their own and you're pretty much barging into their party. So anyone who has some recommendations on some chemicals I can actually use, I'd be very grateful.
Someone please assist, because my sugar is kept open. Actually, I just remember that I've never sealed any of my brown sugar containers, but I don't have that problem. So if there's anybody, please help with information, please.
Regular fumigation helps with that. So
regular being?
Once every 6 months. There's one of the fumigators that I use. I usually tell him, he asks me, what is your main issue? Then I tell him what my main issue is. Then I mention the other smaller things. So based on what I've told him, he gets me what is needed. And that guy has really worked well for me.
I'm sure you're going to share that contact sometime.
Yeah, let me share it on the group.
Oh, thank you. Anyone wants to talk about fumigation before we wrap up on safety and discuss what our next topic shall be? Okay, let's take a minute to talk about safety. We've talked about the health, now we need to talk about the safety. What safety measures do you have in place?
Mark, sorry to take you back. About fumigation, my biggest challenge is actually fumigation. You know how a bakery is, and everything is edible. The way you store it, it is hard to take everything outside. This year, I have completely failed to fumigate. Last year, I did half fumigation. I did half of the house. I had to lock the kitchen, the storage area. I had to lock up everything, and I did one side. It is my biggest, because it's like, if I'm to fumigate the whole house, I have to pack up everything, like I am shifting. It is a very big challenge for me. It is a very big challenge for me. I don't know how to do it, and I have failed. This year I have failed. Every time I keep saying I'm going to do it, but I don't do it. The good thing is, my biggest issue, I have one rat. I think it is as big as someone's head. I think it comes.
So you feed it regularly, and it's okay.
It doesn't eat cake. It doesn't eat cake. I think it comes in for warmth. I think it comes in for warmth. But every time we see it, everyone runs out. I've not been having cockroaches for some time, but I need to fumigate. I really need it, but I don't know how to do it. Any advice?
I think just sacrifice the day. That's the only way you can do it.
Mark, it can't be a day. It will take me a whole week.
I think sacrifice that week.
Yeah, there's no other way you can do it. Or shift.
No.
Stupid man.
It would amount to the same thing.
Just sacrifice.
But I think you just need to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And James says, sacrifice 2 days, get extra hands. I'll come and help, as long as there's cake. I have no problem with that.
Me too.
Yeah. Aino says he's so disgusted.
I need to provide a lot of cake.
I'm down for the cake. I am totally down for the cake.
There you go. So you have hands there to help you. Just tell us when. Preferably not a Saturday.
Thank you.
I have a message from Aino saying he's so disgusted when he sees a fully dressed chef coming from the toilet, and therefore he will not eat food again from that place if that guy is cooking. So if that's all on fumigation, before we move ahead, Abid, should we talk about security, safety, or should we think about next week?
I think we can put that as next week, safety in the kitchen. Okay. Because our time has run out.
Okay, thank you everyone for your pleasurable and meaningful and very good advice and discussion. That's it from me. I don't know what we're discussing next week, except they've said we'll add safety in the kitchen as part of the discussions. And I'm sure Abid is going to nominate somebody to moderate that. So thanks.
James escaped last week. He escaped this week of moderation, so maybe he can moderate.
I'm also escaping next week.
Why?
I don't know. I'm not an expert.
Nothing. You go and read up on it. Now we get to Romeo. My God. Meanwhile, I think we are going to AOB. But the recordings of last week, Max speaks for like 30 seconds, and it makes everybody else sound like we are not present. I think we should.
Am I too loud? What?
No, Max. His voice is
because you worried.
Okay.
Listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I suggest he moderates.
Yeah.
That's all he's.
Max, do you want to moderate next week's session?
Yeah, you should actually.
Yeah.
James, shut up. Look at my timekeeping. Check when I came in. I will be late.
Yeah, you're using Rwandan time. You don't use Rwandan, you use Ugandan time. We are 1 hour ahead.
That's a very good excuse. Maybe I was sleeping.
Yeah, cool. I'll remind you. So Max is our moderator next week.
Hey, for
right.
What is the topic?
Safety.
Wow.
Kitchen safety.
Wow.
Okay, safety, catering safety.
What?
Generally safety.
Okay.
I nominate Tuti as a coach to guide you.
Hey, Jesus. Why? Okay, we'll do that. But now you guys want me to compete with speaking with the way Max speaks, huh? You already said he speaks for 30 seconds and everyone is...
It shall be fine.
Carla, thank you so much, Mark. I joined in a little later. I hope we shall get the audio tomorrow.
All right, cool.
I think it's been recorded. I will advise.
Yeah.
Yes, it has been recorded. Oh, yes, thank God. I thought I had it. Yes, it has been recorded.
Thank you. Bye.
I don't know what this guy ate in the morning.
I haven't eaten anything. I woke up at 9:30. And so people
beer helps. All right, guys. I'm off. Bye-bye. I'll see you on Tuesday next week.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.